Tests have confirmed that human remains found last year are those of the last Tsar's two missing children. It proves that all of Nicholas II's immediate family. For over a century, the Romanov family's fate stayed wrapped in rumors and broken records. Official stories said the last Russian royals were all gone, but doubts never faded. Some bodies were still missing, and many details never lined up. Finally, when advanced DNA testing entered the case, the results did more than confirm what happened. They exposed secrets that Russia buried on purpose. But why would a powerful monarchy work so hard to keep this discovery locked away? Join us as we find out the truth about one of history's most tragic events, the Romanovs' mysterious disappearance. The story of the Romanov family's disappearance was one of the most mysterious tragedies of the 20th century. The Romanovs had ruled Russia for more than 300 years. They had power, wealth, and position. Then they lost everything. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, the last Tsar, Nicholas II, gave up his throne. He left his role as ruler and agreed to let a new government take over. That change was meant to bring peace and reform. Instead, it brought more chaos and conflict. What happened to the family next became a mystery that lasted for decades. After Nicholas II's abdication, the former emperor and his family were moved from place to place. They first stayed under house arrest in a palace near what is now St. Petersburg. The provisional government that replaced Nicholas wanted to keep the family safe from political enemies. But that government soon lost power to a more radical group known as the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were determined to reshape Russia completely and eliminate any danger of a return to royal rule. As the civil war grew, the Romanovs were moved again, this time to Tobolsk in Siberia. There, the family lived in isolation, watched by guards, and cut off from the world they once led. In April 1918, the family was again moved, this time to a house in the industrial city of Yekaterinburg, high in the Ural Mountains. The Bolsheviks had renamed the place the Apatyov House and turned it into a prison. The former Tsar, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children lived there with a few loyal servants. Life for the Romanovs had changed totally. They could no longer walk freely, speak openly, or plan for their future. The world outside was in turmoil, and the family was trapped inside. They had no contact with friends or allies who might help them. By the middle of 1918, the situation outside was even more dangerous. Forces opposing the Bolsheviks were moving closer to Yekaterinburg. The Bolsheviks feared that these forces might try to free the Romanovs and use them as a symbol to rally others against the new government. To prevent this possibility, the local Soviet authorities, leaders of the Bolshevik government in the region, decided that the Romanovs must be eliminated. Some historians believe that the order came from the highest levels of the Bolshevik leadership. Others say it was mainly the local commanders who made the decision. The exact origin of the order remained a subject of debate for many years, because no one in a position of power spoke openly about it at the time. On the night of July 16th to 17th, 1918, at the Apatyov House, the Romanov family was taken to a basement room under the pretext that they needed to be moved for their safety. Instead, a group of Bolshevik guards and officers stood ready. The family was ordered to stand in a line, and without warning, the guards opened fire. The gunfire was intense and chaotic. Some family members passed away quickly from gunshots. Others were still alive when the bullets stopped. The guards turned to other weapons, stabbing those who remained breathing. The violence was complete and brutal. The Romanovs and several of their loyal servants lost their lives that night. After the massacre, those responsible attempted to conceal what had happened. They loaded the bodies onto a truck and drove them to a forest outside the city. There, in what became known as Koptiaki Forest, the remains were buried in unmarked graves. Later, the bodies were disfigured, burned, and covered further to make it harder for anyone to find or identify them. The Bolshevik leaders and the Soviet government did not want the truth to be widely known. They feared that revealing the full details would trigger protest or sympathy for the Romanovs. Because of this deliberate effort to hide the burial sites and the details of the brutal act, accurate information was not available for many years. For decades after the execution, the Soviet government publicly denied what had happened to the Romanov family. They released only limited or misleading details. Rumors spread across Europe and other parts of the world. Many people could not believe that all members of the royal family had been executed. Stories grew that at least one child might have survived, especially the youngest daughter. These rumors were powerful because there was no physical proof to disprove them. The lack of evidence created space for imagination. Some people held on to hope that the Romanovs might still be alive in secret. Others thought that the bodies had been hidden so well that they would never be found. During this long period of uncertainty, many stories and legends developed. Some involved imposters claiming to be surviving Roman children. These claims gained public attention because of the mystery surrounding the fate of the family. Without official proof of death or location of remains, people questioned official accounts. Some believed secret rescue missions had succeeded. Others thought the Bolsheviks might have hidden survivors to use them for political leverage. The world watched and waited, but the truth remained buried with the bodies. It wasn't until the loosening of Soviet control in the late 1980s and early 1990s that the story began to come into clearer focus. In 1979, a grave site was discovered near Yekaterinburg, but it was not publicly revealed until after the fall of the Soviet regime. In 1991, the remains from that site were later exhumed and identified. However, the full truth did not emerge until many years later, when additional remains were found and more advanced DNA analysis was possible. The discovery of the mass grave. In 1991, a remarkable discovery was made in a forest near Yekaterinburg in Russia. For decades, historians and scientists had looked for the burial site of Russia's last imperial family. The location had been a closely held secret for many years, known only to a few people inside the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union fell apart, more information became available. A geologist and others who had long heard rumors about a grave began searching the area. They located a shallow burial site that contained human bones. Russian authorities took control of the site and began an official excavation. When they dug deeper, they found a large number of skeletal remains. The discovery of these bones marked the beginning of a new chapter in solving the greatest mystery of the Roman family's fate. Meanwhile, the burial site, sometimes referred to as the mass grave, contained the remains of 9 individuals. At first, it was not clear who they were. The bones were buried together in a rough, unmarked pit near a former mining area. There were no clear signs or markers to show whose remains they were. Scientists and investigators believed these remains might belong to the Roman family and their close servants, but they needed scientific proof. The bones were carefully collected and labeled for further study. This was not a simple task because the remains were old, fragile, and many were incomplete after decades underground. To confirm the identities of the bones, scientists needed techniques that could withstand the effects of time. Traditional ways of identifying remains were not precise enough. The bones were too damaged to make confident identifications based only on physical characteristics. But modern DNA analysis offered a solution for this problem. DNA is a molecule in every cell of the body and carries the genetic code unique to each person. Even though DNA degrades over time, scientists had developed methods to extract and analyze it from old bones. These methods made it possible to compare the DNA from the remains with DNA from known living relatives. This was the key to proving whether these bones belonged to members of the Romanov family. The first step in the DNA analysis was to categorize the remains. Scientists used a type of test called short tandem repeat analysis, or STR. This method looks at specific parts of the DNA that vary between individuals. STR testing allowed researchers to see how the skeletons were related to each other. The results showed that among the 9 sets of remains, 2 were adults of male and female gender, and 3 were children of female gender. The patterns of relatedness suggested that a family was present among the bones. The nuclear DNA results showed that the adults were likely parents of the children, and the children were related to each other. The other 4 skeletons were not closely related to this family group, which supported the idea that they might be servants or staff who were present with the Romanovs at the time. The second major type of DNA used was mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. This form of DNA is inherited only from a person's mother and can be used to trace maternal ancestry far back through generations. Scientists took samples of mitochondrial DNA from the remains thought to be the Tsarina and her daughters. They then compared these samples with mitochondrial DNA from living relatives who shared the same maternal line. For the Tsarina Alexandra and her children, they compared the mitochondrial DNA to that of living members of the British royal family who were known through historical records to share common maternal ancestors. The results were conclusive. The mitochondrial DNA from the remains matched the mitochondrial DNA of living maternal relatives. This match provided strong evidence that the female remains were indeed those of the Tsarina and her daughters. Identifying the male adult was more complicated because mtDNA cannot be used to confirm a father's identity. Instead, scientists compared mtDNA from the remains believed to be Tsar Nicholas II with mtDNA from living relatives who shared a maternal link with the Tsar through his extended family. The results showed nearly identical sequences, confirming that the male adult in the grave was the last Tsar of Russia. This part of the testing included advanced methods to deal with slight variations in the DNA sequence, which can occur naturally within a person's mtDNA. The combined results from STR and mtDNA tests provided a clear picture. The bones in the mass grave belonged to a family group that matched the historical Romanov family. The individuals included the last Tsar, Nicholas II, his wife, that's Tsarina, and 3 of their daughters. The other 4 individuals were not part of the family, but were consistent with known servants and staff who were executed with the family. The scientists worked carefully to ensure the matches were accurate and not the result of contamination or error. Unfortunately, it was not possible to identify the missing Sonar Alexei and 1 daughter through this initial excavation, which left a small mystery unresolved at that time. Nevertheless, the identification of the main family members using DNA was a scientific breakthrough that confirmed what many historians had long believed but could not prove. The results of these DNA tests were announced publicly in 1993 by British and Russian scientists who had worked together on the project. This was the first time that modern genetic science was used successfully to identify century-old remains believed to belong to a famous royal family. The findings were accepted by many in the scientific community and provided a major step forward in understanding the tragic end of the Romanovs. By matching the remains to living relatives, scientists had solved a mystery that had lasted for more than 70 years. Even after this breakthrough, some questions remained. 2 children that were missing from the family were not accounted for in the original grave. Rumors and theories continued about where their remains were or whether they had survived the execution. Scientists and archaeologists continue to search for additional evidence. Years later, another discovery and tests would eventually complete the picture of the Romanov family's burial, finally confirming that all family members had been executed and buried near Yekaterinburg. The search for the missing Roman children. In the long search to learn what really happened to the Roman family, scientists worked for many years to find every last piece of the puzzle. After the discovery of the mass grave in 1991, scientists confirmed that most of the Romanov family was in that burial site. That left 2 family members unaccounted for. The missing remains were those of the heir to the throne, Tsarevich Alexei, and one of his sisters, who was either Maria or Anastasia. Scientists around the world knew that if they could find the missing bodies, they could solve the mystery entirely. Interest in finding the missing Romanov children never truly faded. Historians and researchers studied old records, including notes from the chief executioner in 1918, who wrote about how the bodies were handled after the annihilation. These notes described how 9 bodies had been buried in one grave, while the bodies of Alexei and one of his sisters were burned and buried in a separate place. This information guided later searches. Archaeologists and amateur history groups began to look for this separate burial site near Yekaterinburg. Over the years, more than one search team tried to locate the remains. Some found small bone fragments, clothing fragments, and other pieces of evidence that hinted at a second burial site. Yet, it was not until the summer of 2007 that a clear discovery was made. Around 70 millimeters from the larger mass grave, archaeologists found human remains that had been badly burned and damaged. Their location matched what was described in earlier historical notes and gave scientists a new lead. The remains found in 2007 were examined carefully. They included parts of a skeleton of a young boy and parts of a skeleton of a young woman. These bones were fragile and charred, making the work of identifying them difficult. But scientists used new scientific tools and advanced DNA testing methods that were far stronger than those available in the early 1990s. These more powerful tools included 3 types of DNA testing. Mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, was used because it could be compared with DNA from known maternal relatives of the Romanovs. Autosomal short tandem repeat, or STR testing, looked at DNA patterns that could show how individuals were related to each other. YSTR testing looked at genetic information passed down from father to son and was used to match male DNA lines. By using all 3 methods together, scientists had a powerful set of tools to identify bones that were more than 80 years old. Scientists conducted these tests very carefully. The first step was to compare the DNA from the young boy's remains with the DNA from the previously identified remains of Tsar Nicholas II and from known living relatives. Because YSTNA is passed directly from father to son, it could be used to confirm that the boy was biologically related to Nicholas II. The results showed a match, confirming that the boy was indeed the Tsarevich Alex. This confirmation ended decades of speculation about whether the heir to the Russian throne had survived. Testing also showed that the young woman was genetically related to the Romanov family through the maternal line. Her mtDNA was very similar to the mitochondrial DNA of the mother, Serena Alexandra, and to DNA from living relatives. These results confirmed that the woman was one of the Tsar's daughters, either Maria or Anastasia. The genetic tests were so strong that scientists described the evidence as nearly irrefutable. The discovery of Alexei and one of his sisters was not just a minor addition to the story. It filled in the final missing pieces about where every member of the Roman family was buried. Once scientists confirmed the identities of the newly found remains, they could say with confidence that all 7 children had passed away in 1918. The complete DNA record established that no members of the Romanov family had survived. Modern DNA confirmation finally made it clear that the Romanovs were all buried near Yekaterinburg. The scientific breakthroughs that led to the identification of the missing bodies marked one of the most important uses of forensic genetics in historical investigation. The combination of mitochondrial DNA, autosomal short tandem repeats, and Y short tandem repeats testing made it possible to analyze bones that were battered by time, fire, and intentional attempts to destroy evidence. The success of this testing proved that new scientific methods could be applied to solve long-standing mysteries about historical figures. Through careful laboratory work and international cooperation, scientists could reconstruct relationships between individuals and connect remains with living relatives across many generations. This was a major success for both science and history. The story of the Romanovs reached a new level of closure for historians and scientists. The evidence showed clearly that Tsarevich Alexei and one of his sisters had been buried in a separate grave near the main burial site. The findings did not just confirm their demise. They completed the genetic record for the entire Romanov family. While some questions remained about exactly which daughter was buried with Alexei, the fact that both children were accounted for ended the long mystery of missing remains. Every member of the imperial family was now identified through DNA. The success of these genetic efforts changed how scientists and archaeologists approach other historical cases. This work demonstrated how science can bring certainty to questions that history alone could not answer. Controversies surrounding the DNA evidence. The DNA identification of the Romanov remains did not end debate immediately. Even after scientists announced strong genetic matches, disagreements continued for many years. The main reason for the controversy was not the idea of DNA testing itself, but concern about how the testing was done, who controlled the process, and whether political or historical pressure influenced the results. Because the Romanovs were not ordinary historical figures, every detail of the scientific work received close attention. Small uncertainties were magnified, and doubt spread quickly. One major challenge involved the condition of the remains. The bones had been buried for over 70 years in harsh soil conditions. Some remains had been burned, broken, or exposed to chemicals used by the executioners to hide evidence. DNA degrades over time, especially in heat and moisture. This made extraction difficult. Early DNA testing in the 1990s required working with very small fragments of genetic material. Critics argued that degraded DNA increased the risk of contamination or incorrect sequencing. Even though laboratories followed strict procedures, skepticism remained because the samples were fragile and incomplete. Another major point of controversy involved mitochondrial DNA results related to Tsar Nicholas II. Scientists found a rare genetic variation known as heteroplasmy in his mitochondrial DNA. Heteroplasmy means that more than one type of mitochondrial DNA exists in the same individual. This is uncommon, but naturally occurring. Some critics claim this variation weakened the identification because early DNA comparisons expected a perfect match. Early misunderstandings about this genetic feature fueled public doubt and conspiracy theories. Religious controversy also played a major role. The Russian Orthodox Church was cautious about accepting the DNA findings. Church leaders emphasized the need for moral and spiritual certainty, not just scientific proof. They raised concerns about whether the remains had been treated properly and whether all tests were transparent. Some members of the church worried that political motives influenced the rapid acceptance of the results. Because the Romanovs were later canonized as saints, the question of authenticity carried religious weight. This led to delays in official church recognition of the remains. Political context added another layer of challenge. The initial DNA testing happened shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Russia was going through rapid change, and trust in government institutions was low. Some people believed the new Russian state wanted to close the Romanov case quickly to reshape national history. Others suspected Western influence because British scientists played a key role in the DNA analysis. These suspicions did not rest on scientific errors, but on distrust shaped by decades of secrecy under Soviet rule. Disagreement also existed within the scientific community. While most geneticists accepted the results, a small number questioned laboratory methods, sample handling, and chain of custody. Some argued that independent testing should be repeated using different laboratories and newer technology. Over time, this is exactly what happened. Additional tests using more advanced methods produced results that matched the original findings. These later confirmations reduced scientific disagreement, but early criticism left a lasting impression on public opinion. Media coverage played a role in extending controversy. Reports often focused on doubt rather than consensus because uncertainty attracted attention. Stories about possible errors, hidden documents, or secret survivors spread faster than technical explanations of DNA methods. Complex genetic concepts were simplified or misunderstood. This caused confusion among the public and allowed myths to thrive longer than the evidence supported. The Romanov case became an example of how scientific truth can struggle when mixed with emotion, politics, and incomplete understanding. Another challenge involved the identification of the final two children, even after their remains were found and tested. Debate continued over which daughter was buried with Alexei. Early reports disagreed on whether the remains belonged to Maria or Anastasia. This debate did not affect the conclusion that all children were deceased, but it added another layer of uncertainty in public discussion. Later, genetic and anthropological studies clarified the identification, but earlier confusion had already reinforced skepticism in some circles. Over time, repeated testing helped resolve most controversies. New DNA technologies allowed scientists to reanalyze samples with greater precision. Each new study reduced the space for doubt. The strength of the evidence increased, not because the story changed, but because technology improved. Despite these advances, the Romanov DNA case remains one of the most debated forensic investigations in history because of what the Romanovs symbolized. And so any conclusion about their fate carried meaning far beyond the laboratory. The burial battles, after decades of mystery and scientific investigation, the physical remains of the Romanov family became central not just to historical truth, but also to how modern Russia chose to remember its past. In 1998, 80 years after the Romanovs were executed by Bolshevik forces in 1918, the remains that had been identified through DNA testing were finally laid to rest in a formal burial ceremony. The burial took place in the St. Catherine Chapel at the Saints Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, the traditional resting place for Russian emperors and members of the imperial dynasty. These remains included Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, 3 of their daughters, and 4 loyal members of their household. The process of re-burial was the result of long political and social changes in Russia. After the fall of the Soviet Union, previously suppressed history about the Romanovs came to the surface, and the Russian government under President Boris Yeltsin sought to formally acknowledge the tragedy of 1918 as part of a broader effort to come to terms with the country's past. The state funeral was attended by relatives of the Romanovs from around the world, diplomats, and representatives of foreign royal families, and marked a symbolic moment of national reflection and apology for a brutal act that had remained a source of historical tension. Despite the official nature of the 1998 burial, the event was not without controversy. Some branches of the Roman family, especially distant dynastic relatives, did not attend the ceremony. These members argued that lingering questions about the authenticity of the remains, as well as disputes over rightful claims to the imperial legacy, made participation difficult. This division highlighted deeper disagreements about how the Romanov legacy should be recognized and who had the authority to speak for the family's history in the modern world. The Russian Orthodox Church also played a complicated role in the burial. The Church had canonized the Romanovs family as passion-bearers, recognizing them as figures who met their end with spiritual dignity. In 1998, the Church refused to fully participate in the funeral rites because it had reservations about the conclusiveness of earlier testing and wanted further verification before recognizing the bones as holy relics. This cautious stance reflected the deep intertwining of faith, tradition, and historical evidence in how Russia honored the Romanovs. The story did not end with the 1998 ceremony. In 2007, additional remains believed to be those of Tsarevich Alexei and one of his sisters were discovered near the original gravesite. DNA testing strongly supported their identification, but unlike the remains buried a decade earlier, these were not immediately interred with the rest of the family. The Russian Orthodox Church continued to push for further testing before allowing these final remains to be placed in the cathedral alongside the others, emphasizing the need for absolute certainty given the family's religious status as saints. Meanwhile, state officials and many historians saw the scientific evidence as sufficient. The disagreement led to ongoing debate about when and where these remains would be officially buried. Efforts to unify the burial of all family members continued into the later years. Government advisory groups and task forces were created to consider how to bring Alexei and his sister into the imperial tomb with those already interred. At times, proposals suggested specific dates for burial ceremonies and coordination with the Russian Orthodox Church. However, negotiations remained complex because of differing views on authenticity, tradition, and how to balance scientific findings with faith-based recognition. The Romanovs' burial and the disputes surrounding it are important not just for history, but for how Russia deals with memory and identity. The re-enterment of the remains in St. Petersburg served as a national gesture of reconciliation and remembrance. It marked an attempt by the post-Soviet state to acknowledge a tragic part of the past that had been hidden for much of the 20th century. Yet the debates over burial rites and recognition also show how history, religion, and politics continue to intersect in modern Russia. This point ties the scientific discoveries to lasting questions about how nations remember historic tragedies. It shows that even after DNA evidence brought clarity to the identities of the Romanov remains, decisions about burial, recognition, and honoring the deceased remain shaped by cultural values, religious beliefs, and unresolved social divisions. What are your thoughts on this dark part of Russian history? Let us know your views in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your